Hi, this is Aaron Azarod, and welcome to the 51st episode of the Truth Island podcast. Today, I'm going to share with you a poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could. To where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that passing there, had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this was a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Life can be said to be a series of choices, with each turn promising one thing or the other. But with each and every turn, we may lose something. Take, for example, the man who gives up his musical aspirations in order to take on a more secure job at an accounting house in order to support his family. On one hand, the man is making a noble choice to support his family and being blessed with the fruits of having children who will one day carry on his legacy. But on the other hand, the choice to start a family and give up personal aspirations comes at a cost of not actualizing full potential. In each choice, something is always gained, but something is always lost. For most of us, however, we make many of these choices without even realizing that we had any say in the matter. We go to school, we get the best job that our specific talents and abilities allow us to have, and we often find ourselves following a road that is perhaps not the one that we want to be following, but the one that has the most footprints. As humans, we have an aversion to breaking away from the safety of our numbers, and this in turn has led many of us to, well, not take the road less traveled. Joining me to help me understand some of the choices that we make in life, I am joined with Katen. Katen, how do we know exactly if we're embarking on the right trail in life?
I don't think that we might really know at the moment. The choices are kind of evident because when you have something that's pretty much blatant, I have to do this, I have to, what job should I get? What career should I take? Those are kind of already easily graspable, but there are other things that you don't realize until maybe a few years down the line that you have taken such a choice. What I like about this poem is that there's so many entendre, going linear, going suspension in time and backwards, in your life experiences. So there's a lot that you can glean from this poem. And I'm glad that you were able to read it.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about us not knowing if we've taken the road until it's like already too late or it's been a few years later. And then a lot of us have these like pivotal moments in life where we're like, oh man, I should have taken that job that paid a lot less money, but would have led me to feel happier. As we, embark upon more roads, whether these are the right or wrong roads, do you think that, there's maybe some intuition or something that we can start gathering that will allow us to maybe best, start understanding ourselves and understanding what roads we should and should not be taking?
I kind of believe, and I don't want to get into religion, etc. It's some sort of destination in mind. And, I think, folks could agree and still apply this to their lives. It's not a single destination. It's like a whole map, very intricate map, and you can end up any points along the way. One decision probably would impact the next decision along the way, right? And and that's when I guess people do have regrets. Let's say you make 5 steps from the original or the mid some decision along the way and you look back, oh, did I make the right decision? Would I be at another point had I made a different decision? I guess if you would consider those decisions as mistakes, and if you're not currently happy with the current position, you may think of those previous decisions as mistakes. And then,
Yeah,
people do say, learn from your mistakes, right? So then you know not to go this way. In the future, you might do things differently. But I kind of think that it's like a single person's journey, really. You know whether you should go this way or that way. Because if you don't make the decision that's correct for you, you're going to have a lot of angst. You know, and then there's some reworking. And that's why I always say like there's the linear path and that there's more like the tortuous path. And I think any path works for the individual.
I think it's also important to not, like, even if you've gone through many, if you've taken wrong turns, I think it's this idea of regret that is something that we should probably avoid as well. Because I think once we've chosen that road, and regardless of whether, like, later on in life we say, oh man, that was totally the wrong road, if there's nothing that we can really do about it, we obviously can't go back in time and change what path we took, but we can learn from that experience and then choose better paths. But I think this idea of just sitting there and lamenting and regretting wrong turns that we've taken is just not helpful.
Oh, absolutely. That's another one of my philosophies. And I know plenty of people who wallow in regret a good part of their adult lives. And
Hmm.
I don't think that helped them much. So I think it kind of stunts the progression. Like you kind of stop in the middle of the road and say, hey, maybe this is not the right road. And then you know that going back is not going to maybe get you anywhere better, but you wish that you had done it. And it's mostly just kind of wishful thinking. It's kind of hypothetical. It doesn't help you go backward or forward. So that's why I always tell people regrets are futile. You just keep moving forward. And and it's good that sometimes you don't even know what you're doing. And you look back maybe several decades and you say, "Oh, is that what I did? And that was stupid, but I ended up here." And I can explain many of the decisions that I made in my life, and it's very questionable at the moment, and probably even looking back questionable. But it all makes sense now. The regret is really a waste of energy. Not to sound preachy, but make a decision, and as you guys would say, own it.
I
People
love I love what you're saying about regret stunting growth. I think that's a phenomenal point that you just made there, because when we are spending time regretting something, I'm regretting my marriage, I'm regretting that relationship, I'm regretting the years I wasted at that job, you're not looking at future pathways that may lay before you. You know what I mean? Because, like, if you're just looking backwards all the time at all the paths that you may have taken the wrong turn on, there might be 100 more paths in front of you that you're not even paying attention to.
Exactly. It's kind of just a different way of looking at life, different kind of glasses. You're looking at things that you're just actually not even looking at your own life. Because if you look at your own life, I think people can deal with it. But if you're looking at another person's life, it seems like regret always involves someone else or some external force. For example, if let's say you were playing the piano and you were a superstar when you were younger, and then you gave it up or something, and then you can say, oh, I gave it up, but you can always pick it up. But it could be because, oh, I don't play now, I don't play as well, or I could have played better, I could have done this. So it's kind of not really where you are at the present moment. it's not your life really. It's kind of like someone else's life. It could be your previous self's life, could be what you could have in the future life, but it's really not your life.
Yes, yes. I love what you're because I think that this gets into this idea of envy. And I know, and I've actually been more mindful of this as of late. Like, for example, one thing, I only speak English, right? I only learned one language. And it's sometimes like I'm embarrassed by it. But when I feel the most embarrassed about it is when I hear someone else like speaking five different languages. And then like I have all of this regret of like, oh, Aaron, you should have taken yourself more seriously in French and Spanish class and all this other stuff. But the bottom line is that those are not my paths and those weren't necessarily the turns that I took. And I wasn't even thinking about that until I kind of rubbed elbows with somebody who does do that. But I think thinking about, well, they were like, if we're talking about paths, maybe they were just in a whole nother forest to begin with.
Yeah, that's true. But my philosophy also is that it's never too late
Yes, yes.
and there's always the right time. For example, I tell myself, I play the violin and I I didn't play for decades and decades and decades, and I picked it up about 10 years ago, and then, I just made up for the difference in the time, just work so vigorously. However, then I would think, if I had picked it up 20 years sooner, I could have been that much more, but I think that was just the right time. Uh,
Wow.
you
Can I
know,
ask you about the violin a little bit? What made you pick it up later in life? I'm just curious. Did you watch a performance or what got into your head that said, let me go back to this?
yeah, so I played the violin when I was in a preteen or middle school, I guess, whatever it's called in those days or these days. And I also play the piano. I've played piano always. So very musical. I love music, classical music, and my children, all of them, most of them, I would tell them, you have a choice to pick an instrument. You have to you have to, play the instrument. But anyway, to fast forward
It's
a
like
bit,
broccoli or carrots, right?
right? Pick your instrument. At least two of them were in orchestra, right? Youth symphonies or schools orchestras. And me, I went to every single one of the performances, the cheerleader, da da da. And then it dawned on me after going through it for about a decade. I'm like, wait a minute, how come I don't play it? Why am
Hmm.
I watching? And at that time, I was kind of getting on in my years, like let's say over 40, getting into too much detail of my age. And so I thought it was a total craziness. I still call it a miracle. In fact, for me, it was kind of a vision. I saw a vision, meaning I just not a vision like seeing a ghost or something, but I saw this kind of a New Yorker cartoon, and it had this really old people string quartet, like, just really old, like, they were all hunched over, but they're playing and I'm like, "Hey, I think maybe I could do that, maybe." And I just thought about it, and somehow I just had that vision, and then things just happened along the way. And
Hmm.
that's a lot of how things work for me. I just get some sort of wish or a vision, and then either I do it unconsciously or things just kind of fall into place so that it happens.
Now I love what you're saying here because this story could have gone in another direction. You could have been taking your kids to these recitals and things of that sort, and you could have also fallen into despair. You could have said, "Man, my time is over. I hope my kids do well at this, but my time at doing this is now over, and it's too late for me." And whether or not you're ever going to get acclaim playing an instrument is irrelevant. What's important is that you took a path forward, and it doesn't matter how successful you are in that path forward. It's just that choosing that path forward is going to personally make you feel better. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Oh, yeah, definitely. For me, again, I just, you get a deck of cards and you play with it. That's kind of always the way I think. And of course, when you told me, "Oh, you could have taken the other path where I said the kids could take over. I live vicariously." And I laughed because I also do that. For example, I do that, let's say, because I also love to languages. So my children are even at my age, I think I like to move abroad and live there, learn a new language and even go to school and this and that. And that thing, I don't think I'm going to be able to take that road. Who knows, right? I may do that again once I get that inception, like vision, it somehow happens. So sometimes I think, oh, that's a little bit far reaching, because I think about my age or the current situation, that kind of thing. But I think anything is possible, really. I mean, I might end up on the street, maybe there, but you have to kind of use somehow your brain. But here's what I always tell my children, and I guess this also follows along with the poem is, Joseph Campbell. I don't know if you're familiar with
The
him, but
hero's journey, yeah.
yeah, he is one of my heroes as well. Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung, all those good guys. And when I read this passage, it's just a little snippet. I don't remember the entire passage, but it ultimately comes with follow your bliss.
Hmm.
And this is, I would consider where you right at your decision that makes you just move just past the junction of the decision. Okay, some people don't follow their bliss, and that could be one path. And then some people follow their bliss, and I tell my kids follow their bliss. Okay, of course, I try to save money so just in case the bliss doesn't
The bliss
end
may
up
not
in
pay the bills, yeah, right?
exactly. Yeah, I mean, so you have to take other things into consideration, but I wish I had his quote just handy because it's so exquisite and it just a way to, and I think this poem also is does that. Whatever the road he chose, he had this kind of the first stanza, right? He's looking at it. Should I go this way, that way? And then at the end, he had a choice, led him to where he is today.
Hmm.
And he can say the sigh, he remembers with the sigh. Okay, maybe there's this flavor of regret. Maybe I get the sense that he's pretty happy with where he is. That's the kind of mood I got from his poem.
Yeah, I think that well, one thing is you don't really have much of a choice but to be happy with where you end up because you can't go back, right? So it's like this is kind of like you have choice in choosing the roads that you take, but ultimately those roads will take you somewhere and you have no choice but to accept and kind of embrace. And perhaps we could even use the word celebrate where it has taken you, whether that's a very successful life or unsuccessful. I mean, those are all value judgments, but I think you have no choice but to be content with whatever road you've chosen for yourself. And I think though that the one caveat though is that with each road you take, you need to start learning a lot about yourself. You need to start learning like, okay, when I was in my 30s, I walked down that road and I don't really feel too great about that. I need to start choosing some other roads. Or, when I was 20 in my 20s, I did that and I really loved myself. Maybe I need to start walking along that road again. So there's a difference between like feeling regret and this like remorse of having chosen the wrong roads. But I think there's always this point where we're in the forest where we can always reevaluate. Like you're not ruminating and you're not just like standing there crying to yourself, but you're carefully dissecting all of the roads you've taken and trying to best suit those roads to who you are as a person.
Yes, I agree. Unfortunately, though, many people, perhaps even more people than who, think the way that you've described, they just stay there. They decide, "Oh, I made all the bad decisions and this is this is the where I'm gonna go," or, maybe they end their life or they take, drugs, or they just, make more and more decisions where they decide it's very, what's the point? It's bleak anyway. Sometimes I wonder when I see people kind of in a bad situation, how, why. Of course, sometimes it's not within your control, of course, but I wish everybody would say, "Hey, I'm here and I did things good and I did things well and not so well in my past and maybe I'll learn from it and go this way." But wherever I wish more people would think that way. And maybe this discussion, the last stanza, that is it. I think that's my interpretation. Where he's remembering the road that he took or the road not taken. See that's the title of it, right? And he says, I remember this with a sigh. Sigh. That usually means usually some sort of like wistfulness, right? Like a maybe regret. But he says, but I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Yes. It's made, I like that. It's made all the difference, meaning like I personally interpret that as in like it's made me who I am today, for better or worse. And there might be some sighs along the way, but ultimately you are the person you are because of the choices you've made and the roads that you have traveled and the experiences. If you went to college, if you were in the military, that ultimately makes who you are. You may not feel great about all of those decisions, but the person looking the person you look at in the mirror is ultimately the sum of your choices in many respects. There are obviously the choice to be born male or female and other things like that are not a choice. We never had a road or a pathway to choose. But for most things in life, what we accomplish or what we fail to accomplish really depends on the pathways and roads that we've taken. Now, I also want to address something that you brought up earlier about, some people get stuck in the forest. And what if I were to tell you, Cotton, that like being a teacher, I've actually met 16, 17, 18-year olds who feel like they can't fix their lives. Because like, we always think that it's like really older people that are like, man, I'm 75, I'm 80 now. There's no way I'm going to do that. And there might be some truth in that, right? I think it's really hard for an 85-year-old to go and get their PhD in biology or something. But it kind of saddens me because I think that even when you're young, there are young people who think that they don't have a choice. And I always say you feel your oldest at whatever age you currently are. So a 16-year-old feels really, 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 really old because that's the oldest age that they have reached. So I think that we all, whatever age we are, we always fall into this trap of like, I'm super old now and there's no way that I can change.
Well, I am old, well, older than you or many people, but I don't feel old. I mean,
Huh.
I say my age, I don't say it because I want to be ladylike,
That's okay.
old-fashioned way. But so yeah, I don't want to say this. It might sound harsh, but here's the thing. Going back to the road analogy, what's happening now, at least today's 18, 16, 17, 18-year old, unlike those, say, from 50 years ago, they know too much. They have too much information. They know too much. Going down the road, they know what happens, A, B, C, D, all of the consequences. At least that's what they think they know. And then they kind of just agonize over that. And that, I think, last night I attended some mindfulness session, and somebody was saying that if you look back, it's kind of maybe leads to depression, but if you go too much into the future, it causes anxiety.
Hmm.
There's a lot of unknown. See, it's unknown, but they know. So what I attribute that is kind of a lack of the adventure spirit. I mean, why not just make a decision and be surprised, right? And
Yeah.
of course, it could be very frightening. And, I don't want to just say, just do it, because I also want to be cautious and have a roof over my head and for my children or for anyone, right? And have food to eat. But I think things will be taken care of. It will work out. So make that jump and don't be so worried.
I think maybe a lot of younger people have a lot of roadmaps, and maybe roadmaps aren't necessarily the best thing at all times. I'll even give you an example from my own life. when I first started bike riding, obviously I'm not that old, but when I started bike riding, there was no such thing as a phone GPS. So I would just take out my bike and I would get lost sometimes. I would try, and I live in Queens, I would try biking to Manhattan. And sometimes I would just get lost and keep biking around for hours and hours. And then the sun would go down and I get nervous. But, oh my God. But let me just say, I really learned a lot about New York City by just biking with no GPS. When I don't have any GPS, I learned so many things. I saw so many things by accident and learned so much. And I think there is something to be said about going about life with no map, and sort of just seeing where life takes you. I will kind of say a caveat to that is, as you travel more, you start learning, okay, well, this is probably a better road for me. So I think when you're younger, you should take a lot of twists and turns and end up in some like unconventional areas. I think that's all about self-exploration. I think that as you start learning the pathways, then it's up to you to start choosing routes and roads that are more suited to where you'll be happiest.
Yeah, that definitely I agree with that. So, and yeah, when you kind of don't have a plan, sometimes the plans don't work out, or sometimes you experience things that you wouldn't have experienced if you had like kind of a structured plan, right? And well, here's where I get a little bit personal maybe, and I don't know how relevant this is, but I have 3 children, and they were born, one in California, one in Massachusetts, one in where's the 3rd one? Oh, yeah.
Where is
Yeah,
that there, right?
yeah. Anyway, San Diego, Boston, Seattle, okay? And those are my favorite cities in the entire United States. I've lived in other cities too, and I've traveled many places. Those are the 3 of my favorite place, but of course, I had to pull somebody out of school to go there for whatever reason I did, and I had to pull him maybe one away from his his family members, and I didn't do it because I had nothing to do with my life, but somehow I had some sort of I had to make some sort of this choose my path. These are my path. I could have just stayed there
Mm, mm.
well worn, but no, I didn't. So I went from I started in Philadelphia to San Diego, and that was another big step. That was a big one of those, the road not taken, or the road less traveled steps. Then from San Diego to Atlanta, Atlanta to Boston, Boston to Florida, Florida to Seattle. So sometimes my children are all grown up, and sometimes I feel guilty. I'm like, I'm sorry that I had to pull you out of school, or the eldest, that you had to move so many times. And then but then I say, but if I had stayed in the same city, your brother and sister would not have been born. Because when I moved there, I never thought they were going to be born.
Yeah, it's funny because I've actually had the opposite. Like I've actually was born in Queens and I've actually stayed here for my whole life. And
Mhm.
I just went to whatever elementary school, whatever middle school, whatever high school I was zoned for, right? I didn't put any thought into it whatsoever. It was, oh, okay, that's the local school, off you go. And I always sometimes wonder of like, well, geez, what if I had pulled myself out of this school and went to that school? Or what if I had attended school in this state? Or what if I had grown up in this area? And would my life have been better? Would my life have been worse? Would I have rubbed elbows with different types of people and that would have influenced me and made me into a whole nother person? And there's really no way of actually knowing for sure. Something tells me, Cotton, though, that Aaron would have just prevailed the same way no matter where he was tossed. I do think that we, each of us, and I'm sure your kids, they each have like an essence to them. And that's what's going to shine brightest no matter what environment they're in.
Yeah, I do agree. And I was kind of smiling because when you say a different version of Aaron, then I was kind of getting into my uh, quantum physics, the world of alternate universes, which I won't go into. But yeah, my youngest daughter, she was born in Seattle, and I was determined to stay in one place. Like, I had this wanderlust. every 10 years I wanted to move somewhere and just
Mm.
explore a city. Back in the day, 80s, 90s, whatever, we had like Rand McNally maps, and I'll pick something and find it. We didn't have Google Maps or anything. So I would go there and say, "Oh, everything is so unfamiliar. I don't know anything." By the time I leave, it was so familiar. But anyway, with my daughter, I felt some sort of guilt. Maybe that's that sigh in Robert Frost's poem. Then I said, after 10 years, I've been living in Seattle for 20 years now. And after 10 years, I thought, I want to move, but where? I used up all the good cities. There are
No, because what you're saying is true because no matter what you do, there will always be regret, right? So let you know whether because I guarantee you that if you had just stayed put in one place, you'd probably be regretting, oh my God, we missed out on living in all these other cool cities, right? So it's like you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation where no matter what you do, there's always going to be a trade-off. There's always something that you're going to have to give up, and that's always going to lead you to feel remorse no matter how successful you end up at the end of the day. I bet even celebrities and I bet even famous people have like 1,000 things that they stare out the window and say, oh, if only I had just married my high school sweetheart or something like that.
I wonder how many of them say that, but yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of people, they live their life and I kind of feel for the younger generations because I think that I always tell my friends, we our generation grew up, let's say, in a park. Then by analogy, the younger generation is growing up in a jungle. It's
Mm.
so much entangled, and there's a lot of danger lurking around. It could be physical or it could be just virtual. Having to adjust, maybe there should be some sort of an adjustment to this poem for the new generation. Maybe the road is going to be this jungle. You got to pick how do you get from this place to another place? And maybe it's more like survival now, right?
Yeah.
A- And if you get out, mostly unscathed, maybe you should congratulate yourself and say, "Hey, I'm alive."
You know, it's funny because I think that, as more opportunities come our way, this
Mhm.
actually leads to more anxiety, and the reason for that is if you only had like two choices in life, all right, you're going to be a cabbage farmer or a pumpkin farmer, you decide, all right, well, that's the one big decision you're making there, and then that's it. But now we have all of these, like, hundreds, maybe even thousands of opportunities and roads that people can travel, and it might overwhelm the human senses to some degree. Like maybe from a biological standpoint, we weren't meant to apply for thousands of jobs and then lament and have anxiety over each of the directions each of these 1,000 jobs would have taken us and so forth. Same thing with dating, for example. I think online dating apps probably cause a lot of anxiety because the options are just so plentiful. Whereas maybe in previous generations, it's like, okay, you go to high school and there's maybe 100 people in your class, choose one of those people and make a life together. But now you have 1,000 people or millions of people to choose from. And this is causing a lot of people anxiety when you have just too many options in front of you.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about the current dating environment, but from what I just, glean from popular culture or whatever. Yeah, and it seems like even so, I think more people are alone or not finding a meaningful relationship, even despite the fact that they have more quantity. Or maybe the propaganda of society says only the people that look like these kind of models or celebrities, this type, is the only people that you should look for, do you know? And I call that propaganda. And that's another. I have a whole list of laments for the younger generation. I think this. I call it propaganda, brainwashing. And so it's kind of sad in a way. That it's become like that. But yeah, wasn't it Jordan Peterson who said that? Was it stress or anxiety? Is because complexity.
I don't think we like complexity. Even I get even like a mild sense of anxiety when I go. Right now, one of my big things is that I avoid shopping malls or clothing stores because I actually feel that there's too much clothing in these
Yeah.
places. And it actually gives me anxiety. I'm like, oh, we got Levi's jeans. Oh, we got 505, 501. They got all these numbers and branding, and I'm like, no, no, no. Something about this is terribly wrong. Maybe I would have less anxiety if there was just a corner store and it was like, okay, size 32, end of story, and they just gave me, because then I don't have to think about it at all. And I think this is something like Steve Jobs said. It's like I just wore the same clothes over and over again, so I wouldn't have to think about it. So sometimes thinking about too many things is causing us anxiety. And I noticed, and I wasn't paying attention to this earlier in life, when I go into a shopping mall, I am just covered and riddled with anxiety, not because there's anything evil with capitalism or materialism, but because of there being too many choices in that mall.
Yeah, I think you have like some sort of sensory overload. But I was just thinking when you said that, I wonder what this poem would have been like if it was 15 rows diverged in a yellow wood. I wonder what his would be a very I wonder what kind of a poem that would have resulted in. I think maybe I should write it. Yeah,
Yeah, he's only dealing with two roads. Like I think
exactly.
I think like 100 and somewhat years later, we're dealing with like hundreds, if not thousands, of different roads. And
Yeah.
it almost like I think maybe when you have two roads, you feel it more because you're like, oh my God, this was the critical juncture in my life.
Mhm.
Now we don't even know where exactly. It's not until we figure out much later. Like, one of the cliches that we have in our culture is in these movies where the bride at the last second runs away from the altar, like in the movie The Graduate or whatever. And that would be kind of Robert Frost idea. Like you got two roads. I either marry this man or I don't marry this man. But now in life, we don't even have these like quintessential like moments. It's just like 1,000 options bombarding us at all different times. So it's almost impossible to even have proper remorse or proper regret for something.
Yeah, you're saying that it's not as meaningful of a decision if it's so much,
Yes.
you kind of dilute it, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
one is like, it's a yes or a no, on or off. And when it's off, it's gonna be off, that kind of
Let's shift gears a little bit. Why do you think, Cotton, that most people kind of, that even though we have all, many roads available, it seems even with these 1,001 roads that we have, many people seem to just follow a very conventional path in life, and in the sense that they go to school, they pick a career in which they are well suited for, or they know a lot of people. Like I'm going to be honest, like I know a lot of people who became pharmacists, nurses, teachers, like myself, and it wasn't necessarily the road that was right for them. It's just that they knew a ton of people that were doing it. They just knew, like, oh, everyone's studying accounting here, or I know enough people, and I have my friends are in this class. So I'm noticing a pattern where people just choose roads that seem to be heavy, like densely populated, rather than roads that might fit their taste a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, and I think that has to do with the social acceptance, but then you always so you wanna follow something that's kind of popular, a trend so that people really care about their reputation so much,
Yeah.
that's you don't wear some kind of style of jeans or something, if you care about that sort of thing, which, I have a strong opinion about, but, what's happening is, so if you think about it, somebody has to start the trend or some right? There's all the followers, but the first person, embarking on it, he's so pseudo original. So, I think in terms of, like, say, career, things like that, I kinda think of some sort of, like, Catholic religion. Okay, I'm not trying to pick on that particular so, what happens is, historically or just experientially, people would just have this kind of experience, say, "Oh, so if you go to this school, if you major this kind of major, then you make more money, and you have a house, and this is this," and over the time, instead of just kind of individual, original choices, it becomes kind of fused, like kind of like a stew. so that like a Creole, so that it becomes this kind of methodology, and it happens in so many things, in almost everything. Something that was kind of intelligently thought of, but maybe either just to make it more efficient, you hand out the stew. Or like, so for example, the Catholic Church, I kind of pick on it, and I don't mean to pick on it at all, because everyone believes whatever they want. But one thing, because I was raised a Catholic, is one thing I knew growing up, going to mass and all that. I never really read the Bible. We were handed missalettes, and we had to know exactly what to do: sit down, sit up, to the point where you don't even know why you're doing it, and you make
Mm.
gestures. So it's kind of like that. And like, say, for example, you just do it because that person's doing, or you want to be the trend. You don't want to be a farmer because it's not cool, or now maybe farmer is cool. What is not a cool thing these days? I don't know what. Everything is.
What you're saying sounds exactly like the discussion I had with Dave about Milgram and conformity, in the sense that a lot of these roads are packaged as safe, high. Like, I like what you said about high paying job. Like, many people will justify a lot of crazy stuff or things that are really
Mhm.
like a lot of people will package things that aren't that desirable because, oh, it's a high paying job, or it's cool, or it's hip, and so forth. And I think you kind of need to like look really hard at what it is that they're trying to package and be like, well, okay, yes, you are right, that is a high paying job, but is it the job that's meant for me? And that's a fundamental question that most people don't ask themselves.
Yeah, but because they're just lost in the gloss. And I think especially now in the social media lifestyle, that gloss is more evident and
Yes.
prevalent. And it's kind of like, if you don't have it, then you're a loser, or you don't have something, you're deficient. And that, but you have to ask yourself. That's why I was kind of backing Andrew Yang. Do you know him? He was a
Yeah,
Democrat,
yeah, I know him.
the universal basic income. I mean, I think that's a really good idea, because you kind of have the basic necessities: food, shelter, just the basic, sustenance. Then you have more freedom to do what you want. And maybe you don't really need all that money to have like a 5,000 square feet home. Maybe 1,000 square feet, or maybe smaller, or 2,000, maybe that would be sufficient. But since it's all kind of bundled together, the survival portion plus one upmanship per portion, it's
Mm.
all bundled together into some sort of a commodity. You have to do this or you don't. And that's another area that I have major peeves about and strong opinion is the education, the meritocracy, fallacy. Even my children, of course, in the beginning, I was kind of also brainwashed, to think that this is the way, you go to this way, linear path. You have to go shoot the highest. What's the highest? Uh, White House, is that the highest or something? We're super rich, but really, is that really the crowning achievement that I would want for my children? I don't know. They'll do whatever they want, but hopefully their mother is weird enough that I gave them kind of counter positions, and
Enough wiggle room, right? I like what you said about having basic needs met, because I think that is fundamental. And the reason it is that if we are starving, right, if all of us are starving, we're all taking the conventional path. I don't care how much of an outlier or how special you think you are. Like, if your basic needs are not met, you're going to probably do a lot of things to just survive and have food in your stomach. So I agree with you that you don't even have the privilege, or you don't have the option to take an unconventional path if your basic needs are not met. So I think that's important. I think having some kind of safety net, or having some kind of wiggle room for people to take the unconventional path. It may not be like, I'm not saying mansions for everybody and just premium luxury comfort for every artist or person out there, but I am saying that if you can ask yourself and say, okay, do I have enough money to pay rent, and I have enough money for shelter and cans of soup, or some kind of basic sustenance, then I think you owe it to yourself to start traveling down some unconventional pathways.
Yeah, because that would be, I think, more exciting, that getting myself into trouble, I like my life and its quirkiness and its heterogeneous. I can say that word. And I look at other people's life, and they have their way, and who am I to say your life is conventional, and who are they to say my life is, unconventional, or I don't even know if I'm unconventional or not, because as Jordan Peterson says, you have to, in order to grow, you have to have some sort of chaos for a while, and then you
Mm.
have convention. So it's kind of unconvention to convention, and that's how you keep moving along.
Yeah, and it's really like I also, I think I spent a lot of time trying to play the game of conventional for a very long time, because I thought that people would like me more, but now I'm starting to realize that when you start living the unconventional life, at first people maybe despise you or have a little distaste, but if you keep on living true to yourself, eventually they will hopefully come along.
Yeah, and do you really care if those people come along? You
No.
know, that's the thing, right? I mean, the right people will come along, and those are the ones that you want around, right?
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I used to do a lot of kind of social experiments. Like I was wondering, I wonder what would happen if I had just had a lot of these social events, da 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 da, and it's kind of fun when it's happened. But then, later on, when I thought about it, I didn't find it so meaningful. But then, of course, sometimes I think, bah, maybe I should just become a hermit because the way things are going with the world and everything. But then I thought, but then it's nice to have somebody, a human being
Yeah.
around. So, yeah, I think I think we need some new guidelines and roadmaps for the 1st century.
Yes, yes. And I think it's a balance where you don't want to necessarily be a hermit. You might have to become a hermit, but the goal is you're not deliberately being like Thoreau and just living in a log cabin and saying, screw the rest of the world. You don't want to become a hermit if you don't have to, but I think that it's better to become a hermit than force yourself to walk down roads that you don't want to walk down, but just because other people are doing it.
Oh yeah, for me, I'm very comfortable, but also this is where the season, the age comes into our favor. Usually it doesn't, but this is only one time. Here's that we have this comfort of like this the stereotype that old people are uncool. So we can really have the freedom to do whatever we want at this point. Without regard for what we're doing, because it's going to be, look at that person, they're doing that. Oh, eccentric, those words. So it's kind of a safety, to do whatever. But I think I was doing that all my life. So, um, what I recently read something and I don't remember the source, but somebody said you have to really confront life with courage and fear at the same time.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
I love that because, yes, you have to do that, right? Because otherwise, what's the alternative? Utter boredom. It's soul-numbing boredom. Me, it's like two, right? One road, the other road. It's like not a analog. It's kind of discrete.
Yes, yes, and I like I love I like what you say, and I think that I think if we have any young people listening there, just be uncool, okay? Just stop trying to be cool and take example from maybe the older generation and just be a square, but be happy, you know? And I think if we could all do that, we're all going to be traveling down the roads that we really want to be walking through. Katen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
This concludes the 51st episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.